Welcome to Generations at Work, where our goal is to build bridges and not walls between the different generations in the workplace. Today, we have another special guest. We have Dr. David Yeager back with us again as we continue our conversation on the motivation and science of the younger generation. Before we do that, if you're interested in learning how to lead different generations, or perhaps you need a workshop or coaching, you can visit maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. And as a special value add to you, the listener, we have a downloadable copy of a free work playbook, a free Generations at Work playbook, again at maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. Dr. Elmore, welcome. I would love for you to introduce our guest again. Dr. David Yeager, please take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Susan. David, we just had a wonderful conversation in the last episode. We want to do round two where we get very practical on how do we lead the younger team members that we got. But real quick, listeners, I want you to know, or viewers, this is David's book, 10 to 25. It's fast become one of my favorite books, and David has fast become one of my favorite authors. He didn't pay me to say that, but I'm just saying. But David, would you take a quick minute? You've got a master class. Talk about that for just a second before we jump in.
Yeah, sure. This is a masterclass called The Power of Mindset. And the basic premise is that there are beliefs that we can interrogate and change, and then they can help unlock motivation in ourselves and also in others. And so the first half of the masterclass is conducted with me and my collaborator, Carol Dweck, who developed the concept of growth mindset. Yeah. And we give the up-to-date version of growth mindset. And we hear from NFL great Steve Young, a quarterback for the 49ers, who's a guest on our class, and how he used growth mindset to become one of the best. And then the second half is really the content of my book, where we've got a lot about managing, mentoring, coaching, parenting. And there are some special guests who are characters in my book who we flew down to record for Masterclass 2. So it's really fun, and we're really proud of it.
It sounds fantastic. And that's where I want to begin. You mentioned Carol Dweck. Carol's a hero of mine. I've been out to Stanford 3 times to interview her, and amazing what a great brain in such a little body. Wouldn't you agree? It's amazing.
But she's going strong still.
She is. Yes. And what a contribution. So you mentioned fixed mindset, growth mindset. Would you talk a little bit about that for a listener that might go, I've heard that, but what does that mean? Just explain it real quick.
Yeah, there are a lot of, popular versions of those ideas that are how we, the scientists, would think about them.
Yeah.
Growth mindset isn't just being optimistic or being open-minded. It's not mindfulness, meditation. Those are all perfectly fine things. But really what we mean by growth mindset is that you believe that change is possible and that you can do something to instantiate that change. For example, if you're struggling with something at work or you have a new kind of skill you're trying to acquire, that it's possible to improve at it with support, practice, different strategies, effort, etc. And that's important because if you believe the opposite, if you think that my ability can never change, then that leads to a whole cascade of kind of pessimistic thoughts. If I have a hard time now and I can't change, that means it'll never get better. There's no reason for me to be optimistic, and therefore I'm not going to try to fix anything.
Yeah. I remember one time talking to Carol about this notion, and she said, Tim, right now my favorite word is the word yet. I'm not good at math yet. I'm not good at baseball, your son, yet. And it's powerful. It seems cliche, but it's so powerful to go, no, my brain's a muscle. It can get better. But David, can I just ask you off the record comment? It seems like our world, this is a seems like, it's not data driven. It seems like our world conditions to a fixed mindset. Have you made that observation too?
For sure, there are things that condition to a fixed. I think there are also conditions that lead to a growth mindset. I mean, you've got all kinds of ideas about effort, improvement, and it's kind of the American ideal, right?
That's true. That is true.
Yourself up from your bootstraps, and which isn't the same as growth mindset, but those ideas are adjacent. At the same time, I mean, you can't watch a major sports activity without having the announcer say, he looks like a natural out there,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
he's cool as a cucumber. And,
Yeah.
the stereotype of the elite athlete or the top performer is someone who is naturally talented, knows they're talented, and feels no sense of concern or nerves or frustration.
Yeah.
And, I was on a podcast recently with Alex Smith, the former 49ers quarterback.
Yeah.
And he was like, when I was in the zone, they were like, "Oh, he's such a elite." He's like, I was super stressed.
Yeah.
I was intensely focused.
Yeah, that's right.
But like that stress made him focus on tiny details, like, is the safety's hip moving back, and can I anticipate the pass?
Yeah. Yeah.
But there was no version of NFL quarterback, and I'm about to fall asleep because I'm so confident, and I'm not.
Yes.
So I think that there are all these messages in our society, and so we have to think carefully about what we take in and how we evaluate it. And I think we should rigorously question those voices in our lives that want to make us think that effort doesn't matter, and that in fact effort's a bad thing because it reveals you as lacking potential. Because those I think set us on the fixed mindset path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
definitely. I hear that some in the young people. Now, you talk about supportive and demanding leadership in the book. So explain the differences in those, and then how do we inspire to both supportive and demanding leadership?
Yeah, so I think that what I tried to do in my book is to summarize what people have been saying for a long time, but in a way that is digestible. And a lot of great management experts, for instance, have talked about how instead of thinking of demanding this high expectations as the opposite of supporting and care, instead think of them as like orthogonal axes, like a 2x2. So I think the conventional view is either I'm a tough, demanding, authoritarian, like a Bobby Knight character throwing chairs at everybody's head if they fail, or I'm a friendly, caring kindergarten teacher that gives you a hug no matter what, even if you can't hold a pencil, and that people tend to be one or the other, and neither is very good, but in your mind, you just are paying the price. Either in the former case, the price of excellence is lots of hurt feelings and despair and misery, but it's what you have to pay, or that the price of me caring for people is that I can't uphold high standards. And what I argue is like you can do both, and like whichever one you start from, you can add the other. If you start out as what I call an enforcer mindset, which is all standards, no support, you can add your support, help more people meet that high standard. If you start out as a protector, where you're very caring and nice, great, add the standards, leave your support. And that combo is what I call the mentor mindset.
Yeah.
We're going to go right to that mentor mindset. I just want to clarify one question. I was with a group on Wednesday, and I get this all the time, and they ask this question, and we call that level 2, level 3 leadership. How do I develop this relationship, the supportive, but also hold to the expectation of the result? And how do I do that and keep those two balanced? If you could just say one thing to any of the leaders out there to encourage them how to do that, what would you say?
Yeah, I get that a lot. And I think it's just a misinterpretation. Some people think support, care, whatever, means lowering standards for the outcome.
Right.
What I mean is it is increasing the means for you to meet the outcome. So you still have the outcome that you're going toward. And it might be like a lunatic goal, but you're going to be equally as much of a lunatic about making sure someone meets it. To give you a concrete example, I write about a professor named Uri Treisman in my book, Chapter 11. It's a legend, mentor of mine, MacArthur Genius winner, best calculus professor in the world. His UT freshmen, so these are public school students, his exams are the same as the Harvard freshman, extremely high standard. But he will do anything to help you meet that standard. He won't do the problems for you, but he'll have all-nighter study sessions.
Wow.
He'll have like really flexible grading schemes. He'll let your later tests make up for your previous. So it's what I like to call outcome rigor with logistical flexibility. So that's how I'd answer that question.
I like that.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So listeners, I want to make sure you caught what David just said. he essentially is saying there's three mindsets that we tend to have as we lead. The enforcer mindset is just that. They're enforcing a standard, come hell or high water. The receiver doesn't necessarily feel supported or loved or whatever. It's just we're enforcing it because dadgummit, we're going to reach the standard. The protector, David, if I'm right about this, is the one that says, oh, bless your heart, you're already stressed out. Let's lower the standard. Josh doesn't need more trouble from me. But you're saying the mentor mindset really is both, and the both and is the answer. Can you give us the phrase that you guys learned as you studied and researched that was the phrase that just really got effort from a young person? Do you mind?
Yeah. So this idea of maintaining high standards with high support I was cued into it in part from some experiments we conducted with Jeffrey Cohen, who's a professor at Stanford and wrote a wonderful book called Belonging, I recommend. And in our experiment, we critiqued the essays of seventh graders. So we had real teachers critique real seventh graders. And typically what happens is seventh graders get their essays back dripping in red ink, and they're like, screw you. I hate everything about this experience, and I'm not going to fix anything. And then teachers go back to questioning all their life choices and feeling like life has no meaning. And then kids are like, I hate school. It's just not a good situation for anybody. And I say this from experience. I was a middle school teacher. And so what we did is we just clarified that the reason why the teacher was providing the critical feedback came from the teacher's belief in the student's potential and their desire to support the student. So we had teachers handwrite basically Post-it notes that we put on students' essays. And the note said, I'm giving you these comments because I have very high standards and I know that you can meet them. And the implication is, first, there's a very high standard. So I'm not being biased. I'm not being mean. I'm just holding you to a standard. But the second implication is, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think that with the right support, you were capable of meeting that standard. And then all of a sudden, the critique comes across like a compliment rather than a sign that I'm trying to trash you or knock you down. And then and what we found is that kids were twice as likely to revise their essays and they fixed twice as many of the suggestions. And it was a very encouraging result because, again, teachers are pulling their hair out just like managers are pulling their hair out when people don't take their feedback. And I went from that study and several others to say, all right, who are the walking, talking embodiments of that high standards and assurance Post-it note? Who does that in everything they do? And once I started following these great leaders and mentors, I realized what they had in common is they all used this mentor mindset approach.
So what are common misconceptions around mentoring in the workplace with this?
Yeah, I would have clarified, I call it a mentor mindset, not a mentor leadership style on purpose. I have nothing against leadership styles. There's plenty of great research on it. But if you look over the last 40 years in the literature, the researchers are way better at describing what the styles are than they are at describing where they come from. And you saw this with parenting styles in the 80s and 90s. So the enforcer mindset, it used to, in the literature, is often called the authoritarian parenting style. And then you'd see parents that, harsh discipline, yelling at their kids, maybe they're spanking them, whatever they're doing. And then you're like, all right, well, why are they all standards, no support? And then what did researchers think? They're like, oh, they must have had an authoritarian parent. Or maybe they had a permissive parent and they're overcorrecting. So it went back to something 20 years ago, which fine, that could be true. But if you read that, you're like, well, sounds like I can't change parenting styles because it was set in stone 20 years ago. And I was like, well, it can't really be the case, in part because that research actually never found super clear links between your own parents and your own parenting style. But in management too, we have many different managers who do many different styles. So how in the world would you know? And so what I realized is that they come from belief systems, and that's why I call them mindsets. If you hold the incompetence belief that young people fundamentally cannot be trusted in their judgment and decision making, they are risks to themselves and to society. Then the next question I have to ask myself is, do I want to be firm or soft? If I think they're incompetent and I want to be firm, then enforcer makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
They're going to blow everything up. They're going to ruin society unless I threaten them with harsh punishment. So the enforcer is like, you feel like you're doing a good thing for kids and the world. The protector too. If you think they're incompetent because they're feeble, they're stressed out, they went through COVID, they've had toxic stress, I can't trust them to work hard and be independent, and I want to care about them, then protecting them also makes a lot of sense. And it would be mean for me to uphold high standards that you couldn't meet. So what's the alternative? The alternative is believing that young people do have considerable potential to be motivated, to work hard, to be resilient, if there are the right supportive circumstances.
Yeah.
So it's a belief in their potential for motivation under the circumstances in which I, as the leader, have created the conditions for that motivation. And once I believe that, then mentor mindset makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It's like, all right, well, what do they need? Maybe the standards aren't high enough. All right, I'm going to be really tough. What do they need? The supports aren't there. I'm going to increase those. So you kind of have a toolkit now once you think of it as a mindset. But if you think of it as a leadership style, then you treat it like the Myers-Briggs or something like that. And like, what the hell are you going to do with that besides put it on your wall and say, this is me?
Yeah, that's so true. I want you to talk for just a moment about what not to do before we end up breaking down what to do. We have alluded earlier about common older generations like Xers and Boomers just leading out of frustration. And I picture the coach who's coaching student athletes just yelling and screaming. You mentioned Bobby Knight throwing the chair across the basketball court. Would you mind just saying, you're observing a lot of managers now. What are some common unhelpful approaches to leading younger generations?
Yeah, I mean, well, the worst by far is to have neither standards nor support. That's just fully apathetic.
Yes.
And I wish that was so rare that we couldn't even study it. But I mean, depending on the workplace, you might get 20 to 40% of managers where that's their approach. And frankly, those are often managers in places where there are extremely high incentive and performance management systems in place for individual performance. And so managers basically only care about their direct reports to the extent that they improve the manager's direct contribution and therefore compensation package. And so those are just toxic workplaces that people don't like, and they kind of only stay in them if it's like a startup where you're going to get equity and you know it's going to be a crappy environment, or just your compensation is incredible. So that's the biggest one, is to truly treat your direct reports like they're nothing. And if you're listening to this podcast, maybe that's never you, but if we're being honest, that happens a lot. On the enforcer side, I think a big mistake I see is in providing feedback on performance evaluations, where we think basically that we're a high performing company, we have exacting standards, I can't let stuff slide, so I need to say all this stuff. And managers don't sort between things that are the manager's preference and things that are truly essential to do. And therefore the employee doesn't know what is like just placating the manager's idiosyncratic preferences versus something they truly need to change and that people actually care about. And so sometimes they'll just then prioritize the wrong feedback or do nothing. And it's not obvious that it's the employee's fault. I mean, it could be that the way the feedback was delivered didn't create a circumstance in which the employee was like ready to grow and learn from it. I'd say the related point is failing to couch performance feedback in the context of someone's trajectory upward in the future.
Yeah, that's very powerful.
Like if the performance feedback is basically, I'm trying to decide whether you're an A performer, so here's a bunch of feedback, and if you don't do this, then you're not an A performer, and frankly, I'm already concerned you're not because of all this feedback I have. Like that's where that's a kind of fixed mindset manager idea, where it's an all or nothing judgment. Very different way to do it. The mentor mindset way is like we all chose to be at a company with super high standards, and we did that because we want to be a part of the best team. And part of being the best on the best team is that everyone, even the top performers, has to improve on things. Technology is changing, our processes are changing, we get new data. There's all these reasons why we have to change. So I'm going to give you feedback in the context of your growth. And I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think that you could be one of the top performers. Mm-hmm. And it's probably not going to feel good, but I never want you to question whether I care about you. Yeah. And furthermore, I might not always know how you need to be supported. So I need you to tell me what support you need to live up to all these standards I'm about to share with you. Yeah. That's a very different way of saying it. And you're still tough. You're not being a wimp or a pushover. It doesn't take that much more time, and you will get a dramatically different result from your direct report.
You just set high standard with high support. And the way that you said that felt empowering to me. As I'm sitting there listening to it, it made me just think of a client I was working with that said the same thing. They were just like, I don't have time. They're not meeting up to, the standard. And I'm like, it's not sometimes what you say, it's how you say it. And the way that you just said that, I think would be so empowering to a young person. So let's break this down. How do we build this mentor mindset? The best practices. You had really good ones. There's 5 different ones you listed in the book, but because people are out there taking notes right now, so don't miss these. What are the best practices? Build the mentor mindset.
Yeah, the first step is interrogating our own beliefs. And I think if we, in our heart of hearts, if we fundamentally believe that this next generation is broken and incompetent, then I could give you all the tips in the world about asking interesting questions and, negotiating preferences. And you'd be like, sure, but that's a dumb thing to do because young people are incompetent. Yeah. So the first thing you have to do is really interrogate what you believe about them, and start seeing their potential to do impressive things under the right conditions. And then there are practices I write about in my book that increase in their difficulty, but the first ones are pretty easy. The first one I write about in chapter 5 is just transparency. And sometimes it's as simple as a sentence or two before we do all the stuff we were always doing. And especially if we already think, I'm going out of my way to give you feedback, that means I care. You should know that. I shouldn't have to tell you. Well, it's great you already intend that, but sometimes you got to be like 3 or 4 times more transparent than you think you need to be, because there's a power difference. You have more power in the situation if you're the manager, and people with less power, especially in a negative interaction, will tend to interpret that interaction in the worst possible light unless we give them a very good reason for thinking differently. So transparency is the first one. The second is questioning. So I looked at these studies of expert tutors. So who are the one-on-one tutors who get 2 standard deviation improvements, And interestingly, they're not the people who are the best at, explaining force and momentum in physics. Like they're not coming up with these amazing analogies or whatever. Like they might be sometimes, but really what they're doing is they're asking questions 95% of the time. They're just curious about why someone is struggling, and then they engage in what I call collaborative troubleshooting. And collaborative troubleshooting is like, why do you have that? That's interesting. Tell me how you got that, right? It's just like a tone of curiosity. This isn't a perfect analogy, but I don't know, my 5-year-old now will like wake up in the morning and stack one chair on top of another chair, and then he'll climb up it and try to get like cookie dough or something. And, my instinct is to come down and be like, what are you doing? Stop that immediately, and like yell at him, right? And I've learned that sometimes it's better to just say, what's your plan? Because then they're like, oh my God, I had no plan. It's just like all of a sudden it occurs to them they had no plan when they're on top of this teetering mountain of chairs. And so, and the basic insight there is that if you're trying to be a mentor in the mentor mindset way, I don't mean sitting with someone for coffee every Tuesday and all this. I mean, just like in your interactions, you take a mentoring stance. You're trying to transfer thinking and responsibility to them, in part so that you don't have to do all the thinking and be in charge of everything. And the only way to do that is to induce them to do the thinking, and questioning turns out to be a really good way to do that. And then there are other tips in the book about how to deal with stress. The super important message is a sense of purpose. people get purpose totally wrong. They think it's all about long-term self-interest. And what I find is that beyond the self-contribution, like kind of self-transcendence, is often far more effective at engendering a sense of commitment, especially to details when things are tedious, rather than pay in the future. And there are other tips like that I write about in the book.
Very good. Very good.
Well, David, I want to ask a $64,000 question. If someone walked up to you and said, David, I just got a couple of minutes, what's the very best step I can take to bring out the best in a young person? What would you say?
Yeah, I would say that the number one thing is to really take them seriously.
Yeah.
Treat them as though you're taking them seriously, even when they screw up.
Yeah.
And like sit there waiting, expecting them to own the high standards. Yeah. And you'll be amazed what happens when you take them seriously and act accordingly. And then I think the number one thing in terms of changing our own habits around that is what I call the do-over. And it's that we're not going to get the perfect mix of standards and support every time. Sometimes we'll come across as too enforcery, other times as too protectory. Great. Add the other half. Go talk to the other person and be like, you know what? I didn't live up to the standards I'm trying to meet.
Yeah.
I still need you to do this important thing.
Yeah.
But let's talk about how I can support you better to meet the standard.
Yeah.
And people will remember the do-over way more than they'll remember the initial screw up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Learning from doing. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough, and I know our listeners can too. If you want to learn more, Dr. Yeager has the book 10 to 25. We're so excited. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And a reminder to you, if you want to pick up your free Generations at Work playbook, or if you want to access or have questions about how to bring generational diversity training into your organization, go to maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. Dr. Yeager, thank you for being here. Dr. Elmore, as always, thank you for being our subject matter expert in the generational diversity world. And we appreciate everybody for being here, and we'll see you on the next podcast.